Before I get into my formal remarks, I'm feeling a lot of things in this moment. So I did just want to say that, you know, it's a very serendipitous and a humbling honor to be the Congresswoman for this district, a district that 25 plus years ago, I was an intern in the office of, before being later hired as an aide. I started as an intern, and I was an unpaid intern while working 3 paid jobs. And the reason why I had pursued this internship with Congressman Joseph P. Kennedy II while a student at Boston University was because of the work that he was doing on redlining. And it was while being an intern in that office and meeting constituents over the phone and as they crossed the threshold into the office that I really began to understand the role that policy plays. And it's where I really sharpened my acute understanding of what I call policy violence, because I was seeing up close and personal every day the ways in which policy could inflict hurt and harm. But it's also where my appreciation for the power of policy was really born. And it's why I say policy is my love language, because if we can legislate hurt and harm with short-sighted, discriminatory, draconian policies like redlining, then we can legislate healing and equity and justice too. And that's really what I seek to do. The other thing is that I grew up in an activist household. My mother was a tenants' rights organizer. So there's always been that housing connection. So I pursued that internship because of what Congressman Kennedy was doing around redlining. And I wanted to better understand what could be done to grow Black home ownership. That was before I even had the verbiage to understand a racial wealth gap. I just knew what I was living in, growing up. And, now to have the humbling honor of serving as the Congresswoman for this a seat that I began in 25 plus years ago as an unpaid intern, it is surreal. And then to be able to do this work in partnership with all of you. So I have to give credit where credit is due. It really all began with my mom. So when you talk about accolades, may she rest in peace and power. That's the greatest gift and accolade of all, is that I'm her child. And because she was a tenants' rights organizer, I did grow up with the fundamental belief early on that housing is a human right. And so I thank you for the opportunity to join you in virtual community, to celebrate and to recommit ourselves to the mission of CHAPA. I thank all of the tireless advocates. I thank Rachel and Amy for the invitation to join you. And I thank everyone connected to CHAPA, the board, the staff, volunteers, custodians who keep the building clean, every single person that's a part of that community. Thank you for your sweat equity. Thank you for laboring in love. I also want to congratulate our very deserving awardees for the evening, Jean and Jared, Engine 6, and Yes for Newton's Future. Thank you for the generosity and the selflessness with which you share your gifts with community. Thank you for being community builders. And that is so important now than ever before. We're experiencing a tsunami of hurt, and I think the word of the moment has been unprecedented. Everything is unprecedented. And we wish it was unprecedented in the most transformative, bold, progressive, and inclusive ways, but it's an unprecedented in terms of the hurt and the trauma that people are experiencing and the many destabilizing factors. But one of the things that has inspired me in the midst of this global pandemic and a national reckoning on racial injustice and an economic crisis that already existed before the pandemic, but that has been exacerbated under this administration and certainly by the pandemic, what I've been inspired by is the collective care and the mutual aid that we see. People, more intentionally caring about their neighbor and our community. And so certainly this is something that the CHAPA has always modeled, but more are reading the memo and catching on in the face of and the gravity of the challenges that we're facing. And so that certainly does embolden me. And we need to be emboldened. We need to be resolved. We need to be determined, because we cannot allow these unprecedented challenges to in any way hinder our organizing and our mobilizing and our pursuit of a fairer, more just and equitable world. And safe, clean, affordable housing is really critical to the foundation of our collective vision for healthy families and healthy communities. And, you know, even as my heart breaks knowing that the eviction moratorium in Massachusetts expired last weekend, I think we all recognize that too many families struggling with housing instability. That was true well before the COVID-19 virus. And so this pandemic has really only further laid bare those injustices and these deeply entrenched inequities and disparities in everything from education and healthcare to housing and to jobs. The Massachusetts 7th is one of the most diverse, dynamic, vibrant districts in the country. It is also one of the most unequal. And that is exactly why I ran for Congress, because in a 3-mile radius from Cambridge to Roxbury, life expectancy drops by 30 years and median household income by $50,000. You know, that's not naturally occurring. That has everything to do with the lack of political will and courage, and also policies, you know. So this is why I'm so focused on policy, and I'm grateful to be with you all this evening, because I heard a rumor that you guys are policy wonks. So this means I'm at home and I get to do a little bit of a deep dive, and you all are going to be able to really hang in there with me. So I appreciate you for that, because I really do think that's the only way to make systemic transformative change. But I also came here primarily, you know, I will enumerate some of the things I'm working on in Congress, but really to celebrate CHAPA, you know, and you'll be doing that throughout the evening, but there is much to celebrate. And especially what you've been able to do in the face of an administration that's really hell-bent on criminalizing poverty, you know. And so two of the tenets that I want to lift up that I've spoken to people who have directly benefited from is, you know, you're providing over 20,000 first-time home buyers with practical education and assistance through CHAPA's Massachusetts Home Ownership Collaborative. I know people who have benefited directly from that. And then certainly your work on zoning, you know, so timely, again, especially against the backdrop of this national reckoning on racial injustice. And so I appreciate your MEI program, which expanded to 9 communities where you've helped to pass new inclusionary zoning ordinances. You've advocated for city council approval of large multifamily developments with significant affordability and allocated CPA funds for affordable housing. So I wanted to lift that one because certainly I feel close to that, having served on the Boston City Council for 8 years. And so thank you for that. But all of this is about expanding access to home ownership and allowing families to build generational wealth. And of course, we see the racial wealth gap continues to grow. And as Amy mentioned, I serve on 2 committees and a lot of subcommittees, but I do want to focus today on the fact that I serve on the Financial Services Committee, which obviously is direct oversight of our nation's housing and banking. And so while our counterparts in the United States Senate, this GOP-led Senate that carries the water for this cruel, callous, and corrupt administration, you know, they have abdicated their responsibility to lead. They have turned their backs on the American people and on working families time and time again. You know, instead of moving to pass months ago a comprehensive relief package to meet the scale and scope of the hurt, what did they do instead? They've approved 222 federal far-right leaning judges. So, you know, their priorities are not us. But I won't get political here except to say that we've been dealing with an administration for 4 years that has contempt for the American people, and we deserve one that has compassion for the American people. And so this Senate has abdicated its responsibility to lead. Mitch McConnell self-appointed himself as the Grim Reaper. And so, you know, they have refused to lead, but our committee, Financial Services Committee, and Chairwoman Waters, who recruited me for this committee, said, I want you on this committee, but this is, just know, we're gonna work. And she has been true to her word in that regard. And so we've been hard at work passing legislation to address our acute housing needs during this pandemic and beyond. And I want to underscore the beyond, because it won't just be about the recovery. This is about a reconstruction, because again, these injustices existed before, right? So when we say we want to return to normal, no, we don't. The status quo normal was already insufficient, unjust, and inadequate to begin with. So I want to enumerate every piece of legislation, but Amy, since you mentioned the Public Health Emergency Act, I do want to talk a little bit about that. You know, that's to provide funding to states and local governments responding to the needs of families and individuals experiencing homelessness during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so again, you know, the Senate abdicated their responsibility to lead, but this House, you know, this Democratic majority-led House continued to stand up. And I was, you know, glad that key tenets of this bill that I advocated for were included in the CARES Act, specifically $4 billion in emergency solution grants, ESG funding, which have been dispersed to providers across the district. And as a result of our continued advocacy, the Public Health Emergency Shelter Act was included and passed in the HEROES Act. Again, Amy, I think you read my notes before, so thank you for bringing that up, Susan, for bringing that up at the top. And then as we reckon with a looming eviction tsunami caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, I was proud to co-sponsor the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act with my sister colleague, Representative Ilhan Omar, which would suspend rental and mortgage payments during the COVID-19 public health emergency. It also directs the Department of HUD to establish a fund providing reimbursements for payments suspended under the bill. Notably, the bill requires HUD to establish an affordable housing acquisition fund to support the acquisition of multifamily housing projects by nonprofit organizations, public housing agencies, cooperative housing associations, community land trusts, and state and local governments. Are y'all still with me? These are my policy walks. Okay, you're with me, thank you. I don't get to do these deep dives very often, so I appreciate that this is a virtual room where I can do that. So this is critical legislation that would not only keep millions of renters and homeowners afloat during this crisis, but support the greater mission of affordable housing preservation leaders like CHAPA. So our neighbors deserve housing justice. And housing justice, I want to underscore this, housing justice means it means eliminating, not simply alleviating the consequences of policy failures like housing shortages and homelessness, okay? Housing justice is eliminating, not simply alleviating the consequences of failed policies. So this is why I was so proud to co-sponsor the Ending Homelessness Act of 2019, authored by our esteemed and historic Chairwoman Maxine Waters. And I love that it said ending homelessness, because that is possible. One of the most stunning data points revealed in that first hearing in the Financial Services on the Ending Homelessness Act is that for the price of a single aircraft carrier, roughly $13 billion, you heard me, with a B, we can make emergency funds available over the next 5 years to end homelessness. So when we say that budgets are a reflection of our values, and when I say that if you believe that all lives matter, if you believe that Black lives matter, the only receipts that matter are policies and budgets. So this is a reflection of our values and what we prioritize. So the fact that we can end homelessness for $13 billion, the price of one military aircraft carrier. I mean, that just gets me every time. So this would mean an additional $5 billion to the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Grant. It would mean $2.5 billion over 5 years for new special purpose Section 8 housing choice vouchers. And it would also mean $1.5 billion dedicated to the National Housing Trust Fund. And I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers, but it's like, I want us to really just think about, you know, just how sizable that impact could be. So in keeping with our holistic approach, my team and I, and in partnership with you to housing and wellness, there's also in this Ending Homelessness Act, $20 million allocated to integrate housing and healthcare initiatives through our states and local governments. And I look forward to working with all of you to make these pieces of legislation and more a reality for our neighbors and the residents we serve. So even though there's hard work ahead for all of us to recover from this pandemic, to restore our democracy, our decency, and our peace of mind, to undo the hurt and harms caused by systemic racial inequality and injustice in our country, I still believe in the power of us. This is election season, and let me say this. My mother told me early on that being a super voter was our superpower. And whenever she would take me to an election booth to vote, a polling day booth, she would pull the curtain and turn to me and say my whole name, which I'm not going to tell y'all. She would turn to me and say my whole name, and she would say, never forget that we the people are powerful. I believed her then, and I still do now. The state of our movement is strong, even in the midst of such unprecedented times and an uncertain landscape. So I do want to, as I say good night, leave you with an affirmation that I have been revisiting every morning. And it is from the words of a dear sister friend and scholar of mine who's teaching at Harvard right now, but you might see her on cable news from time to time. Her name is Brittany Packnett Cunningham. And what she offered is that, you know, in these challenging times, the following: I choose to practice the discipline of hope over the ease of cynicism. And I choose fortitude over fatalism. I just want to leave that with all of you, because hope is not a feeling, it is a practice. And so I hope that you can receive that as I extend that to you. It has really fortified me every morning. And again, thank you all for the honor of joining you in virtual community. And thank you for what you do each and every day, laboring in love to make housing justice real.